Congratulations, you've completed the first week of the Purification program. Only 2 more weeks to go. So this week, let's have a little bit more fun. We're going to talk about 200 calories. Would you be able to recognize that if that was in your plate? We're also going to talk about water, and we're going to talk a little bit about sugar. So 200 calories, what does that look like? So if you look at the pictures on the slide, you can see that you can have a fair bit of mini bell peppers, a big bunch of broccoli, a lot of apples, and only half of a very small sesame seed bagel. That's 200 calories. When we're looking at alcohol, look how small an amount it takes to make up 200 calories. So alcoholic beverages are very concentrated sugar liquids. So they do pack quite a few calories in per ounce quantity. If you're looking at brown sugar, it's the same thing. It's a very, very small amount. That's 200 calories. 3/4 of a very small blueberry muffin and a little bit of the Doritos. So when people eat a big bag of Doritos, there are a lot of calories that are going in. When we're looking at nuts, peanut butter, nut butters, or just salted mixed nuts, it doesn't take a lot to make up calories. So when you're choosing nuts as a snack after your purification program, if that's appropriate for you, just bear in mind that it doesn't take a lot of nuts to make up a lot of calories. So it's very easy to overdo it with nuts as a snack. So if you keep it about 10 nuts as your snack, you're probably about right in terms of the quantity and the number of calories. Candy, very easy to make up calories. That's free calories. It just goes in your system. But if you're looking at real food like canned black beans, you can actually have a little bit more food. So for real food, a little bit more food, less calories. When we're looking at eggs, these look like about small to medium eggs. You can have about 3 of those. That's about 200 calories. You can have a lot of baby carrots, a lot of carrots. When it comes to French fries, again, apart from the issue with fried foods, it doesn't take a lot of French fries to make up 200 calories. Let's talk a little bit about water. Water makes up about 60% of our total body weight. So we're mostly water. 2/3 of that lives inside our cells, and 1/3 of that lives outside the cells. So that's located in between the cells and around some of the organs in our blood. As your body weight increases, as your percent body fat increases, your total percentage of water will decrease. So some people have as low as only 45% body water because of the percent of fat that they have in their body. It's also interesting to think that we're 60% body water, but our planet is 70% water. So there's a parallel between who we are as individuals and what our planet is like. But of that 70% on our planet, only a very, very, very small percentage is actually drinkable water. Most of it is actually salted water or water that's not available to us. Americans are drinking increasing numbers of bottled water annually. It's almost about 8.6 billion gallons of bottled water. 40% of that comes from tap water. So you may think you've been drinking water that comes from a pristine rainforest somewhere, but it may be coming from one of the municipal tap water reserves. When you're looking at water bottles in plastic, only 1 in 5 ever gets recycled. So most of that goes to landfill, most of that winds up in our environment. And some of the older water bottles may take up to 700 years to decompose, before it actually returns to something that the earth can work with. So a tremendous amount of waste. The cost of bottled water is also tremendous. It's almost like $10 per gallon compared to like fractions of a penny per gallon from what comes out of the tap. You also have to consider that bottled water is a very wasteful way of making water. It takes almost like 3 liters of water to produce 1 liter of bottled water, mostly because of the use of water in the plastic bottle process. Plastic bottles are basically petrochemicals, which are not good for us. They have health issues. In 2006, they estimated that Americans drank the equivalent of, what would be 17 million barrels of oil to produce the bottled water that they required for that year. That's enough to fuel 1 million vehicles for an entire year. Petrochemicals produce 3 tons of carbon dioxide. So for every ton, it produces 3 tons of carbon dioxide, which is also contributing to the heating up of our planet. If you were to fill your plastic water bottle 1/4 full with oil, that would be the amount of oil that is required to make that plastic bottle. It's a huge amount of waste. And not only that, but there are also chemicals within the plastic that may leach into the water that may disrupt your neuroendocrine system. So it may affect your hormonal balance. And there are also other issues with water in that it may contain pharmaceuticals, pesticides, and cosmetics that are not monitored. The other issue with water is fluoride. We don't think of fluoride as an issue with our water because we've been used to it. It's been in our water supply since 1945. We just assume that fluoride in water, in municipal water, is actually a good thing. It's interesting that when we look at the source of the fluoride, it's a byproduct of the manufacturing of phosphate fertilizers. So when we follow the money on some of the agents that are used in our food system or in our water, that it's tied in with other big corporations. Tooth decay has been declining in the United States since fluoridation began. But when they look at countries that have not put fluoride in their water, their rates have also declined. So in a small dose, it may be good for your dental health, but over a long period of time, it may lead to issues in terms of bone health. There's natural occurring fluoride that occurs in vegetables, fruit, tea, and juices. We definitely get it in toothpaste for most of us who in the population who use fluoridated toothpaste, but by and large, our largest source of it is in drinking water. There is an issue with getting too much fluoride, and it occurs in children who are developing their teeth before they get their permanent teeth, and it causes fluorosis, which is has aesthetic issues. It can be a browning or pitting of the teeth, and it's estimated that that affects 1 in 4 Americans. At very high doses, fluoride is actually a very toxic compound. It can cause intestinal irritation, weakening of the bones, developmental issues in terms of the brain, so lower IQ, impaired kidney function, and can also be a thyroid disruptor. Lethal doses are very, very small. It only takes 5-10 grams as a lethal dose in adults. So fluoride in it by itself is a toxic material. The fact that we've put it in our water supply I think has political implications. It was probably done with the best of intentions, but is not necessarily the cure-all for everything. There is a study that was done by the NIH at the University of Iowa. It started in the 1990s and it's still ongoing, following 600 Iowa children. And some of the findings of this research were really interesting and I think surprised a lot of people. Basically, they found that fluoride intake has very little relationship to cavity prevention. It has significant relationship to the dental fluorosis, meaning the cosmetic defects in the teeth, and also has some significant relationship to bone health that have yet to be determined in a more significant fashion. There's another study in 2007 that was done by the British Medical Journal that said that there were no randomized trials of water fluoridation, which are currently standard for all drugs. So for a product that is so toxic, there have been, basically we've been guinea pigs for the last many decades. So not necessarily something that's required in our water, but something that is there. Regulatory agencies assure us that while pharmaceuticals are measurable with our advanced technology, they are not believed to be a public health hazard at the present at the extremely minute levels that they exist. Basically, we don't know this. I mean, this is a statement done to assure us that our water is of satisfactory quality, but there are many pharmaceuticals that are not measured in the water. That may be an issue. People dispose of their drugs and their pharmaceuticals down toilets and drains that get into our water supply. So there are hormones, birth control pills, pain medications, the list goes on in terms of what can be in our water. And it definitely, in the small quantities over a long period of time, can become an issue for some people if they're sensitive to it. There are no municipal sewage treatment plants that are engineered specifically to remove pharmaceuticals and personal care products. So basically there are some water quality issues, even though for the most part, it is free of bacteria and other things that can harm us in the immediate future, but there are some quality issues there. So what we would recommend is don't use plastic bottled water if you can avoid it. I mean, sometimes we have to. We're traveling, we're in an environment where nothing else exists. You're traveling in a foreign country that may have water issues to start with. But for the most part, if you can avoid it, do not use plastic bottled water. Use filtered tap water or reverse osmosis if you can. There are no methods that are perfect when it comes to water. It just adds an extra layer of protection. They may take out some of the volatile organic compounds, maybe take out some of pharmaceuticals, although we really don't know. If you have a choice, use a stainless steel or a glass bottle you can clean. Some of them have an outside that's plastic and an inside that's glass. I mean, I think those are probably optimal in terms of their safety and durability. Only distillation or reverse osmosis will remove fluoride, so it's not that easy to remove, and just because you have an over-the-counter filter or under-the-counter filter doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting rid of some of these chemicals that are in our water system. There is a YouTube that is just fun to watch. It's on the storyofstuff.org, and it's an explanation of a little bit of what we just talked about in terms of the waste of plastic bottled water. I would absolutely encourage you to watch it. It's very short, it's very cute, it's kind of cartoony. The Story of Stuff. They also have other videos on other things that they want people to gain some more awareness on. So let's talk a little bit about sugar. You know, we hear about carbs, we hear about sugars. Sugars are basically, you can divide them in two different categories. There are simple sugars, basically sugar building blocks, one or two of these building blocks together. So we see that in milk with lactose. A lot of people are lactose intolerant. Fructose is typically more of a fruit-sourced molecule of sugar. Honey is a mix. It usually has fructose, glucose, maltose, and sucrose. Juice can have a lot of things. When we're talking about HFCS, that's high fructose corn syrup. Definitely something you want to avoid pretty much across the board if you can. And then table sugar, which is basically sucrose. When we're talking about complex carbs, we're talking about chains that may have thousands of these sugar building blocks together. So that's the reason why they're called complex as opposed to simple sugars. So when you're looking at starchy vegetables, potatoes, peas, corn, dried beans, peas, they have a little bit of that sweetness, like a lot of the root vegetables. Grains and grain products, things that are made with grain flour, like the breads and the rice and the pasta, are also carbohydrates. And fiber, fiber is a carbohydrate that is not easily digestible, so a lot of it will be eliminated through your bowels, but they do have some very beneficial properties in terms of helping you eliminate. Also, they're very good for feeding the good bacteria in your body. So when your practitioner is saying, you know, you're eating too many carbs and you're looking at it and, you know, you're eating potatoes and peas and breads and rice and pasta, they basically will all get broken down into more simple carbohydrates in your body. Our bodies can only absorb these very simple sugar building blocks, these molecules. So basically, as you eat these foods, these carbohydrates, digestive enzymes in your body will break them down into very simple, absorbable building blocks. So the complex, these thousands of building blocks get broken down into, you know, much more absorbable products by the body. Eventually, all these simple sugars and starches get converted to glucose. Glucose, you know, just like your glucose monitor, glucose is your main source of fuel, of energy in your body. That's what the brain uses. That's what all your cells use. So it's a very important compound in the body. So when you eat a meal and all of a sudden, you know, these sugars get absorbed, this will trigger an insulin response. Your pancreas is the organ that produces insulin, and insulin is a very important hormone. It helps break down, transport, and metabolize and store these sugar molecules in your body. Excess sugar that you don't need for your body needs will be stored as a compound called glycogen in your liver and your muscles. And this is a normal process, and this is something that we would expect, and it's actually a necessary thing. You need stores. You know, in an emergency, you will draw from these stores for your needs. But if there's excess, you're eating much more than what your body needs, and then you max out on these storage capacities, then there's an issue, because now that excess sugar starts getting converted and stored as body fat. So we've always thought of fat as an issue in diet for the last many, many, many decades, but actually sugar is a major contributor to obesity. We're eating way too much sugar in our diet, and you can see it in the American diet. I mean, even the medical profession for decades was saying, eat low fat, you know, a little higher on the carb because there's a cost to doing low fat. and our population has just expanded dramatically. So sugar, carbs really need to be monitored, and they really need to be held in a smaller amount. So let's talk a little bit about high fructose corn syrup. It's been in the news, it's been in the commercials, there's been some spin on this from the industry trying to make it look like it's a good thing. But basically high fructose corn syrup, it's in pretty much a huge number of foods in our food supply. It is an industrial food. Yeah, it is not a natural food. It is not something that occurs naturally. So as much as the corn industry, the corn growers, the corn, big mega corporations have said, oh no, this is a natural food, it's made out of corn, it's a synthetic food. It has no place in our diet, but unfortunately it's cheap, it's easy to make, it's subsidized, and it winds up in so many of our food compounds. It comes in many different concentrations, 42, 55, 90% high fructose corn syrup. The reason it's used so much in the food industry is it is so much cheaper and sweeter than regular cane sugar. Cane sugar is actually pretty labor intensive to produce, and it's very expensive compared to corn-made sugar. The problem with high fructose corn syrup is it doesn't necessarily have to say that on the label to be that. So it's hiding in your food as corn syrup, hydrolyzed cornstarch, corn sugar, maize syrup, glucose syrup. It has a lot of different names that they use to not call it high fructose corn syrup. It'd be a lot easier if we can just see it on the label and know that that's what it is. The problem with high fructose corn syrup is it contains both the glucose, and remember glucose is the fuel that your body uses, and it has some fructose, which you find in fruit, but the reason that fructose is not so much an issue in fruit is because it's linked with a lot of fiber, so it has a different way to be absorbed and digested in our body. So when these two basic sugars are not combined together, there's no digestion required. It's absorbed very, very, very quickly. When you absorb a lot of glucose very quickly, it spikes your insulin. Remember that insulin, if you have excess sugar, will start triggering a lot of major fat storage. Fructose is actually independent from the pancreas, so unlike glucose, it doesn't cause a big spike in insulin. It actually gets absorbed straight in the liver, and it bypasses all the normal digestive processes of sugar, and it starts making lipids, and it starts making fat in your liver. So there are a lot of metabolic disturbances that are linked to the consumption of high fructose corn syrup. Cane sugar is also glucose and fructose, but they're bound together, so the digestion of cane sugar is different. Your body knows what to do with that. It's not a synthetic food, it's not an industrial food. So they're not identical. High fructose corn syrup and cane sugar are not the same. They're not handled by your body in the same kind of way. So a lot of independent medical and nutrition experts really do not support the use of high fructose corn syrup in our diet, and we would tend to agree with that. Despite all of what the corn industry is saying that there's really no difference between sugar and high fructose corn sugar, there is. High fructose corn syrup is actually a marker of poor quality, nutrient poor, disease-creating industrial food products or food-like substances. This is from Mark Hyman, who's an integrative medicine expert, and we tend to agree with that position. High doses of free fructose have proven to literally punch holes in intestinal lining, so that leaky gut kind of issue. So it triggers inflammation, which can actually lead to obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, accelerated aging. So when we're looking at high fructose corn syrup, there are issues. It is not a simple food. This is an industrial food. This is something that does not belong in a high quality diet. Whenever you see that as an ingredient, you're looking at a very poor nutrient food. There's something there that they're just making up for, and that is done for industrial reasons. Food with high fructose corn syrup, you find it everywhere. It's in fast food, it's in soft drinks, it's in those sports drinks. It actually is in ketchup and bread and baked goods. You can find it almost everywhere. Again, it's cheap, it's easy to make, it works, it makes everything sweet, but the problem is it's really going in a lot of different foods that you're probably consuming and you're not even aware of. The average American eats about 41.5 pounds of high fructose corn syrup per year. Germans, about a pound. You can probably get away with a pound, but 41 pounds is a huge amount of sugar. And remember what happens, fructose goes to your liver, it starts making fat, you get excess sugar intake that spikes your insulin, and then you start having what's called metabolic syndrome. You start gaining weight, your blood pressure goes up, you're pre-diabetic, so it's a big issue. So the countries that are using that high fructose corn syrup have rates of diabetes that are 20% higher than countries that don't use it as a sweetener in their foods. Sugar in any form can cause obesity. If you eat enough of it, you actually wind up going in that route where you start becoming pre-diabetic, eventually you gain too much weight, you're insulin resistant, and it goes into a direction that is really not going to end well for you. Those sweetened sodas, those sport drinks, very easy. A lot of free sugar. Average teenager consumes maybe 2 of these soda drinks per day, and some people do actually a gallon of that. It's a huge issue for our health. So it's not all about the fat in our diet, it's a lot more about the sugar in our diet. Another good resource on this is Dr. Robert Lustig, The Bitter Truth on YouTube. He's a pediatric endocrinologist. He has a really wonderful way of explaining the issues with sugar in the body. I would actually encourage you, if you have some time, there's some shorter versions of this and longer versions of the video, but if you have time, it's really worth watching. I think he puts it in a very, very clear fashion, what the issues are with sugar and high fructose corn syrup. So if we just look at this chart of obesity and high fructose corn syrup, you don't have to know statistic to know that they actually correlate pretty well. So since the 70s, high fructose corn syrup has become really a very common product in our food chain. Our obesity rates have increased. There are other factors that also play a role with this, but the correlation is just interesting to watch. Bottom line, processed sugar is not necessary at all in anybody's diet. All these colored foods, all these synthetic foods, all these over sweet foods, you can have a little bit every now and then as a treat, but it really should not be a daily or weekly part of your diet, not if you're looking at addressing your weight. So there are also some synthetic sweeteners out there, and the FDA has approved several non-caloric sweeteners. Non-caloric sweeteners meaning that they're calorie-free chemicals that actually are sweeteners, and you see them in restaurants everywhere, and they include saccharin, which is a sweet and low, aspartame, NutraSweet or Equal, Sonnet, you don't see very often in our area, sucralose, Splenda, and there's some different derivatives. The problem with a lot of the synthetic sweeteners is they're synthetic. They're not compounds that are naturally occurring foods. So we would say if it's a synthetic food, don't eat it. If nature didn't make it, don't eat it. Some of these compounds, even though they have no calories, will actually alter your biome. It will alter your good bacteria in your gut and cause other issues that way. So avoid them, in all situations. There are also natural sugar replacements that are available. We see those as stevia, which is a plant. It can be a little bit bitter, so some people don't mind that taste so much. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and actually made from Chinese fruit. Beets are very sweet. I've had cakes made with beets, and they're delicious, and have a very different source of sugar in them. Honey, maple syrup, molasses, or plain old cane sugar. Your body knows what to do with cane sugar. It's handled by your pancreas. As long as you're limiting your amount of sugar, it should not be a major issue.